The club breathed heat before anyone inside it did, the ventilation system working against itself on a September night that refused to cool, and Freya pressed her back against the service corridor wall and counted to 5 before stepping through. It was a ritual she had invented somewhere in her second month at Obsidian, a private clause inserted between the corridor and the dining floor. 5 seconds to compress herself into the smallest possible version of herself, so that the transition onto the floor felt less like exposure and more like sliding through a gap nobody else could see. The corridor smelled of fryer oil and industrial cleaner. The floor beyond smelled of whiskey and someone else's money. She smoothed her hands down the front of her black server's apron, which she wore over a black blouse she had bought 2 sizes too large, so that the fabric draped from her shoulders and fell in a shapeless curtain past her hips, obscuring the full arc of them, obscuring the heaviness of her thighs, the generous width of her waist. 5 seconds. She stepped through. The dining floor of Obsidian was always described in city glossy magazines as dramatic, and the word was not wrong in the way magazine words usually were. The ceiling vaulted 3 stories above the central dining room. The walls were dark lacquered panels interspersed with smoked glass, and the lighting was the warm amber of old money, designed to make every face at every table look expensive. Freya moved through it the way water moves through a turbine, with invisible purpose, following the path of least resistance between tables, her notepad already open, her pen already poised, because the moment you looked like you were searching for direction on the floor, someone found you and gave it to you in a way you would not enjoy. She had learned that by watching others get found. She had learned most of what kept her safe at Obsidian by watching others get found. Table 9 was at the back of the east wing, set apart from the dining room's main current by a low architectural curve that the designer had called an alcove and that the staff called the penalty box, because the section's geometry made it nearly impossible to service efficiently and easy to ignore. Freya did not ignore it. She had been assigned Table 9 for 11 months. The night the club breathed the hardest and gave the least back, Alaric Voss came and sat in it. The kitchen had not been told. The floor manager had not been told. Freya was carrying 2 plates of the braised lamb with pomegranate reduction that Table 7 had ordered 40 minutes ago and had been reminding her about every 8 minutes since, and she came around the architectural curve into the penalty box section with the plates balanced perfectly and stopped in a way that was not graceful but was controlled, because she had been carrying things for 26 years, and she knew how to stop without dropping them. There were 3 men at Table 9. 2 of them she had never seen before, seated with their backs to the curved wall in the way that men who expected trouble always sat. The 3rd man sat at the head position, the chair she had always left pulled out because nobody used it, and he was wearing black jacket, black shirt beneath it, the collar open at the throat, in a single concession to informality that somehow made the formality of everything else more absolute. His hair was dark and pushed back from his face with the minimal effort of a man who didn't think about his appearance because he had never needed to. His jaw was a clean architectural line. His eyes, when they found her across the short distance of the alcove, were the color of obsidian glass in bad light, dark, flat, and entirely without warmth, and yet she could not look away from them, not immediately, not in the rational time frame available to someone with plates in her hands and a Table 7 reminding her about their lamb. He did not look away either. "Those," said one of the 2 men she didn't recognize, gesturing toward the plates with the casual authority of a man used to gestures being obeyed. "Those aren't ours." "No," Freya said. She found her voice before she found the logic of the situation. "They're for Table 7. I apologize for the interruption." She backed up 1 step, the plates still level, and turned toward Table 7. She delivered the lamb. She wrote down Table 9 in her notebook and put a question mark after it, because nobody had told her it was occupied. and she was going to need to know what that meant in terms of the modifier for her station tips, and whether she was technically responsible for the table if it had been activated by management override without floor notification. She was thinking about tip modifiers when she came back. She stopped thinking about them when she got close enough to see the dark-eyed man at the head of the table watching her approach the way you watch something you have already decided about. "Bourbon," he said. His voice was what the club's low ceiling would have sounded like if the low ceiling could speak. It carried without rising, absorbed into the warm amber air, with a weight that made the word feel like a sentence. Neat. "Of course," Freya said. She looked at the other two men. "Gentlemen?" They gave their orders. She wrote them down. She felt the obsidian eyes following the movement of her hand, following the notepad, and then she felt it as a heat signature rather than a visual event, traveling slowly from the notepad to her wrist, and from her wrist up the draped black fabric of her sleeve. And she told herself she was imagining it because she always imagined things that weren't directed at her and assigned them incorrect significance, and she walked back toward the bar with her notepad and did not look back. His name was Alaric Voss. She knew his name the same way every staff member at Obsidian knew it, which was in the way you know the name of weather before it arrives, through the change in barometric pressure that others carry in their posture, in the way the floor manager had stopped breathing normally for the last 6 hours, without knowing he was doing it. Alaric Voss owned Obsidian. He owned 3 other restaurants, 2 hotels, and a commercial property portfolio that had been profiled in business publications with carefully worded admiration. He had not, in 11 months of her employment, sat at table 9. He had not, as far as anyone in the service staff could confirm, sat anywhere in the penalty box section at all. The penalty box section was where staff put tables they had decided to forget about. Freya had not forgotten about it. She had, in fact, spent 11 months making table 9 the best maintained table in the East Wing, because it was her table, and she did not do anything at half effort, regardless of whether anyone was watching. The linen at table 9 was always freshly drawn. The candle was always replaced before it could gutter. The silverware was always aligned with the edge of the table to within 2 millimeters. She had never expected this to be witnessed. He witnessed it. She understood this on her 3rd return to the table, when he said nothing at all but picked up the fork, examined its alignment with the table's edge, and set it back precisely where it had been. It was not a gesture of criticism. She didn't know what it was. She knew what it was not. It was not the absent, glazed non-attention of a man who had not noticed the woman carrying his bourbon. It was not the polite blankness of someone performing civility at a restaurant. She had a graduate degree in accounting. She had spent 3 years as a forensic analyst for a firm that had since been acquired by people who thought her salary was the fat to be trimmed first. She was good at reading patterns. The pattern of Alaric Voss's attention was precise and deliberate and aimed, and it aimed at her, and she put it in a category marked impossible, and did not open the category again for 7 more days. The 7th day was a Tuesday. Tuesday nights at Obsidian were quiet in the way that well-funded machinery is quiet, suppressed rather than absent. Freya had been on shift for 4 hours and had served 22 covers, and calculated in the portion of her mind that never fully shut off that the table average for the East Wing was running 14% above the Monday median, which meant the kitchen had gotten the new pomegranate supplier's stock in and had stopped apologizing for it in the plating. She was carrying a tray of dessert covers when the new hostess, a woman named Clarissa who had been employed for 3 weeks and who wore her sample-size clothing like a certificate of qualification, stepped directly into Freya's path and did not move. "Oh," Clarissa said, with the specific bright vacancy of someone performing surprise at something they had arranged. "Oh, I didn't see you. You take up so much room it's hard to miss you, I would have thought." And she laughed, the laugh of someone who has made this joke before and found it reliable. 2 of the bussers nearby went very still, which was the staff equivalent of looking away. Freya's hands were occupied by the tray. Her face went to the expression she kept in reserve for situations where her face was all she had access to. Level, still, the expression of someone who had been a large woman in public for 26 years and had run out of surprise at what public spaces required her to absorb. "Excuse me," Freya said, and stepped around Clarissa and walked to the table and set the dessert covers down with perfectly calibrated care, and smiled at the couple at the table, ate, and went back to the service corridor. In the corridor, she held the empty tray in both hands and breathed. The industrial cleaner smell was present. The fryer oil smell was present. She counted to 5. It was not the same as the 5 seconds at the top of a shift. This was 5 seconds of a different kind. The kind where you reminded yourself that you had a plan, that the plan was simply to continue, that continuing was something you were historically competent at. She did not know that Alaric Voss had been standing at the end of the dining floor when Clarissa stepped into her path. She did not know that he had watched the entire exchange without moving and with an expression that his second in command, a man named Dario who had been with him for 9 years, would later describe as the expression Alaric wore in the 2 seconds before something permanent happened to someone. She did not know any of this. She went back out to the floor and finished her shift. She found out about the expression the following evening when Clarissa was no longer employed at Obsidian. This was not announced. Clarissa simply was not there, and the scheduling board had been updated with the clean efficiency of a man who did not feel the need to explain administrative decisions. Freya noticed the absence and filed it and went to work. What she did not file, what she held instead in the part of her mind that was not analytical, was the memory of the dark-eyed man at table 9, sitting in the chair she had always left pulled out, picking up the fork and setting it back exactly where it had been. 2 weeks after Clarissa's disappearance from the scheduling board, something else disappeared, or rather, it failed to appear. Freya ran the East Wing's end-of-shift inventory for supplies used against the register receipts, because she had been doing this informally for 5 months, and had noticed discrepancies that the formal accounting staff had apparently not noticed, and on a Wednesday evening, with the dining room winding down and the kitchen running on skeleton crew, she found the discrepancy that was not a rounding error. It was not a supply variance. It was a pattern, a systematic skimming operation embedded in the inventory management software's reporting layer, exploiting a gap between the point-of-sale data and the supplier invoicing cycle that would have been invisible to someone who didn't understand both sides of the data flow simultaneously. Freya understood both sides. She had spent 3 years at a forensic accounting firm finding precisely this kind of architecture inside organizations that had paid someone a great deal of money not to be found. She sat with the receipts and her notebook at the prep table in the service corridor and felt cold in the way you feel cold when you have found something that is going to cost someone, and you are not yet certain who the someone will be. The numbers told her the approximate monthly extraction rate, the start date, the methodology, and, if she ran one more set of comparisons, probably the individual who had structured it. She had run these comparisons on corporate clients with legal teams and NDAs. She was sitting in a service corridor in a restaurant apron, having run them on a paper notepad, by personal choice, on a Wednesday. She should have left the notebook at the prep table. She should have gone home. She was sitting there at 11:15 when the corridor door from the main building interior opened and Alaric Voss came through it wearing the charcoal coat and the closed expression of a man ending a long evening, and he stopped when he saw her the same way she had stopped when she had seen him at table 9, not ungracefully, but with precision. His eyes moved to the notepad, then to her face, then, briefly, to the receipts fanned across the prep table surface. "Miss Harlow," he said. He knew her name. The knowledge of this fact traveled through her with the specific temperature of something she had not expected. She had been Ms. Harlow on the employment contract and invisible on the floor for 11 months. "Mr. Voss," she said, "I was finishing the inventory." He said nothing. He looked at the receipts. "There's a discrepancy," she said, and she heard her own voice doing the thing it did when she was afraid and trying not to show it, which was to become very precise and very factual, as though precision were a physical structure she could stand inside. In the inventory management software, between the POS data and the supplier invoicing cycle, someone has built a gap into the reporting layer. The extraction started approximately 7 months ago. She paused. "I was going to write it up and leave it for management." "Show me," he said. Not a request. She showed him. She spread the notebook open and walked him through it, the way she had walked corporate clients through it, precisely and without apology, because the numbers did not require apology. They required clarity. He stood beside her at the prep table and looked at the notebook, and she was intensely, uncomfortably aware of the physical fact of him, the height, the breadth of the shoulders under the charcoal coat, the way the corridor's fluorescent light fell on the sharp line of his jaw, and she kept her eyes on the notebook and her voice on the numbers. When she finished, he was quiet for long enough that she heard the kitchen exhaust fan cycling. "How long did this take you?" he said. It was not quite a question. "This specific analysis?" "An hour." She straightened slightly. "I have a forensic accounting background." "I know," he said. She looked up then, which was a mistake in the sense that looking directly into the path of something that has its own gravity is always technically a mistake. His eyes were on her face, and they were not flat the way she had thought they were from across the dining room. Up close, in the corridor's fluorescent brutality, they were simply dark and extremely attentive. "You ran a background on your server staff," she said. "I run backgrounds on everyone in my buildings." He picked up the notebook. His hands without gloves were large and precise. The hands of a man who had built things and, she suspected, had also unmade them. "You worked at Reyes Marchetti until the acquisition. They restructured." She said it with the neutral compression of someone who had described it this way many times. "They let you go," he said, without inflection, and the precision of it was worse than criticism, because it was simply true, and he said it without making it a wound, which somehow made her feel the shape of the wound anyway. "Yes," she said. He held the notebook for another moment. His thumb moved across the edge of a page, not quite turning it, a gesture of consideration rather than action. Then he looked at her again, and something in his expression had changed, not softened exactly, not in any way that destabilized the architectural fact of the stillness he carried, but shifted, the way the air in a room shifts when a window opens somewhere in the same building. "You've been running this analysis voluntarily," he said. "For how long?" 5 months. Without telling anyone. I wasn't certain enough to tell anyone until tonight." She paused. "I was also not certain it was my place." He said nothing for a moment that lasted precisely long enough for her to become aware that her hands were clasped in front of her apron, which was a thing she did when she was trying to make herself smaller, and she was aware of it and did it anyway, because 11 months of practice did not disappear in a corridor. Then he said, "Sit down." Freya looked at the prep table stool, then back at him. "I've been standing for 7 hours," she said. "Sitting down is not an improvement I need to be invited to." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the same family. "No," he said. "I imagine not." He pulled out the other stool and sat across from her at the prep table, and the gesture had the quality of a decision. Deliberate, irreversible, settled. "I need you to tell me who ran this." "I need to run one more comparison," she said. 20 minutes. "Run it." She ran it. He sat across from her at the prep table and watched the receipts rather than her, and she was grateful for this in a way she could not quite justify, except that his attention was a physical thing, like a hand near your shoulder, and doing forensic accounting, with that quality of attention directed at you, required a calibration she did not currently possess. The name, when it emerged from the comparison, was the operations manager. She said the name without preamble. Alaric's jaw tightened once, a single muscular event, controlled and brief. "Marcus," he said, not to her. "I can document it formally," Freya said. "The methodology is clean enough for a legal proceeding if you want to." "I won't," he said, with a quietness that closed the topic with finality. She understood, with the same analytical clarity that had found the skimming architecture in the first place, that Marcus's situation was going to be resolved through channels that did not include legal proceedings, and she filed this understanding in the category she had already built and labeled impossible, and left it there. "Is there anything else you've found?" he said. "In 5 months. A supplier margin compression in the wine program that suggests a kickback arrangement with the sommelier. Minor, $1,200 a month at most." She met his eyes. "And a property insurance classification on the Meridian Street building that doesn't match the actual use of the space, which might be relevant depending on what the space is actually used for." The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. It had a texture to it, a specific density that she recognized as the silence of someone recalibrating. "You should know," Alaric said at last, in a voice that had dropped a half register and acquired a quality she had not heard in it before. Not warmth exactly, not warmth in any simple sense, but the rough-edged approximation of warmth that a voice carries when it is speaking around something rather than past it. "That I sit at table 9 because you maintain it." Freya's hands went still on the receipts. "You drew fresh linen every night for 11 months, he said. "For a table that was supposed to be a dead section. You replaced the candle before it could gutter. You aligned the silverware." He paused. "I noticed in month 3. The fluorescent light hummed above them. The kitchen exhaust cycled." Freya looked at the receipts, which were very clear and very physical and made sense in the way that numbers always made sense. And then she looked at Alaric Voss, who was sitting across a prep table from her in a service corridor at 11:15, and who had apparently been noting the alignment of silverware for 8 months. And she said the first honest thing she had said in the conversation. "I didn't think anyone saw that," she said. "I know," he said. "You do a great deal of excellent work for an audience of 0. His voice was level. "I've been correcting that assessment." She could feel the heat of the corridor differently now. Not the ambient kitchen-adjacent heat of the ventilation system working against itself, but something localized and specific, originating from the direction of the man across the prep table. She told herself she was running a fever. She had not run a fever in 4 years. "The table," she said. "You sat there because of the linen." "I sat there," he said, "because of you." The linen was the evidence. Freya looked down at her hands. They were large and capable, and she had spent the majority of her life making them carry things. She said carefully, "You should know I'm aware that what I am physically is not—" She stopped, started again. "I'm not the kind of woman that men like you mean it about." He was quiet for a long count. Then he said, "Men like me. Successful. Precise." She gestured vaguely at the general fact of him, the architecture and the cost of the coat. "Men who have options." "I have a great many options," he said, in the tone she had come to recognize as his conversational register for stating facts he found slightly tedious. None of them noticed the candle. He looked at her hands, the capable, large, careful hands she had just been examining. None of them ran 5 months of forensic analysis on a paper notepad because the numbers weren't right. He raised his eyes back to her face. "You're going to stop telling me who I mean things about." It was not a request. She recognized this by now. None of the things he said were requests. She opened her mouth and closed it. "You," he said, and his voice had the quality it had briefly acquired earlier, rougher at the edges than the rest of him, "are what I've been looking at for 11 months. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately from her face to the curve of her shoulder under the shapeless fabric, and she felt this gaze the way she felt heat. Not a visual event, but a physical one, something that registered in the skin. Every oversized garment you wear is designed to make you smaller. It doesn't work. You take up exactly as much room as you are meant to take up. That's not a compliment," she managed. That's a factual statement about physics." "Yes," he said. "I'm not in the habit of saying things I don't mean." The kitchen exhaust fan cycled again. The fluorescent light above them was the harsh, honest light of a place that had not been designed for anyone to be seen in. The anti-amber, the opposite of the dining room, and she was sitting in it with her receipts and her notepad, and the evidence of what she had found, and what she had become in 11 months of excellent work for an audience of 0. And Alaric Voss was sitting across from her in the same light, and she thought, with the part of her mind that stayed clinical even when the rest of her was not, that he looked exactly the same in fluorescent light as he had looked in amber. There was no gap between the versions of him. She was still thinking about this when he said, "I'm restructuring the finance function for the consolidated portfolio. 7 properties, 2 development projects, 1 situation that requires ongoing forensic oversight." He folded his hands on the prep table surface. The gloves he had been wearing when he came through the corridor door were in his coat pocket. She had noticed when he removed them. "I want you running it." "I'm a server," she said. "You were a server," he said. "Tonight you found a 7-month extraction scheme and 2 ancillary fraud indicators. You have a graduate degree and 3 years of forensic experience that a mid-market firm wasted when they eliminated your salary and kept the associate who was billing half your value." He paused. "You're going to stop telling me what you are," she breathed. "The situation," she said carefully, "that requires ongoing forensic oversight. Is that the Meridian Street building?" "Among others." She looked at the receipts. She looked at the notebook. She thought about the category she had built and labeled impossible, and whether it was structurally sound to keep a category after the contents of it had been sitting across from you at a prep table for 40 minutes explaining its own evidence. "If I take the role," she said, "I need full access to the accounting infrastructure, not edited versions, the actual ledgers." "Yes," he said, "and I need to be in the room where decisions happen, not briefed afterward." "Yes." "And if I find something you don't want found, then I need to know about it before someone else does," he said. "That's the job." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fluorescent light hummed its honest, unforgiving hum above both of them. "I'll need a week to document the Marcus situation formally," she said, "so you have something clean if you ever need it." "You have 3 days," he said. "After that, you have an office." She nodded. It was a single, precise nod, the nod of someone who has accepted terms and intends to meet them. Alaric Voss looked at her nod the way he had looked at the fork alignment, with the specific quality of attention that is given to things that confirm what has already been decided. "One more thing," he said. He reached into the interior pocket of the charcoal coat and withdrew an envelope and set it on the prep table between the receipts and the notebook. "That's the address of an account. It's been open since month 4. He met her eyes without apology and without elaboration. I wasn't certain what I was going to do with it. She picked up the envelope. She did not open it. "Month 4, she said. "The candle," he said. "The 3rd time I watched you replace it." She set the envelope back on the table. She looked at it for a moment, this object that had existed in parallel with her 11 months of invisible work, this account that he had opened when she was 3 months into treating a dead section like it mattered, when she was carrying things for an audience of 0. She thought about the first Tuesday, the bourbon neat, the dark eyes that had not been flat. She thought about Clarissa, who was no longer on the scheduling board. She thought about the fork. "I haven't decided," she said, "how I feel about this." "I know," he said. "You will." Marcus was removed from the operations manager position at 7 o'clock the following morning. Freya knew this because she was in the building at 7 o'clock, which was not her shift, documenting the extraction scheme in a format that would satisfy a legal proceeding she privately assessed as unlikely. Dario, whose name she learned that morning and who had the specific quiet efficiency of a man who anticipated instructions rather than receiving them, brought her coffee she had not asked for and set it beside the notepad without comment and left. She drank it. It was correct, not sweet, not diluted, exactly the temperature and strength of something made by someone who had paid attention to what she drank. She paused over the notepad and thought about that, about who had paid attention, about month 4, about an account waiting open while she replaced candles for 11 months for an audience of 0. She was not yet ready to unfold the specific category she had built and labeled impossible. But she opened the drawer of the desk Dario had shown her to that morning, a desk that had apparently been waiting in an office off the main administrative corridor with the same quiet readiness as the account and the coffee, and she put the envelope inside it, and she closed the drawer, and she went back to the numbers. The numbers were clear. They always had been. She had always been better at clarity than she was at letting herself be seen. Better at finding what was hidden in other people's accounts than at accounting for what was visible in her own. Alaric Voss had a talent for the inverse. She was beginning to understand that this was not incidental. She was beginning to understand that very little about Alaric Voss was incidental. She had 3 days to document Marcus. She had 3 days before she had an office, before the category labeled impossible became a category that required a different label entirely, before she stopped being the object of a sentence she hadn't written and became instead its subject. She had been invisible by design for 11 months, invisible by practice for longer than that, and she had been good at it in the way you are good at things you have built survival around, in the way you are good at things that have kept you safe from being seen, and therefore safe from being dismissed. The table had been maintained for an audience of 0. The table had not, as it turned out, been maintained for an audience of 0. There had been a set of obsidian eyes watching since month 3, calibrating the distance between the silverware and the edge of the table, deciding something without announcing it, opening an account at month 4 and leaving it open for 7 more months while the candle was replaced and the linen was drawn fresh, and the woman doing these things moved through the penalty box section with invisible purpose and went home in her shapeless garments and told herself she was built for not being seen. She finished the coffee. She picked up the pen. She was very good at her work, and her work was about to expand to a scope she had not permitted herself to imagine. And there was an envelope in a desk drawer that she was going to decide how she felt about, and the fluorescent light above the desk was honest and unforgiving, and she sat fully in it, with her shoulders back and her notepad open, and she began. If this story made you feel every second of that slow burn between Freya and Alaric, that moment in the corridor, the candle at month 3, the account that had been waiting, please give this video a like, because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need exactly this kind of story in their lives. Share it with someone who understands what it means to be the most capable person in the room and the most invisible, because they deserve to see what happens next. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Obsidian has more secrets than one operations manager, and Freya has more drawers to open. And leave a comment below. What was the moment you knew Alaric had already decided? Was it the candle? The fork? Month 4? Tell me, because I want to know what you saw that she couldn't yet see in herself.